Okay, so in good news overnight, 0 new cases. So well done, Queensland. And we are still seeing record numbers of people getting tested. So the number of tests conducted in the last 24 hours has been 11,894. And of course, we still want people to practice their social distancing. And if you're sick, stay at home and get tested. It's absolutely important. We still have 12 active cases, and our total confirmed cases stays at 1,085. So we still have to make sure that we're vigilant and make sure that we're doing everything we can to stop any spread of COVID. The Deputy Commissioner will talk about 3 men who were intercepted crossing the border illegally from Victoria. They arrived in Queensland on August the 2nd, and they came up from Victoria, so they passed through the Victoria-New South Wales border. They came into Queensland, and they are currently in quarantine, and they are in the process of getting tested. So we don't want people to do this. It's not right. People are obviously lying on their declaration forms, and it is undermining all of the great work that Queenslanders have done. So I'll let the Deputy Commissioner talk more about that. Can I just mention the issue that has been raised about the man who was working overseas, who came in and flew from Sydney up to Maroochydore. Can I say this? There is a loophole here and it needs to be closed. I will be raising this at National Cabinet. There have been some reports going around. I have now asked, these documents have all been forwarded to the Police Commissioner to investigate. Our understanding is that a letter was provided on DFAT letterhead, and there was an exemption that was also granted. So this will be fully investigated, but there is still a loophole that needs to be fixed, and I will absolutely raise this at National Cabinet on Friday because we are in a really serious situation here. I think anyone can see what's happening in Victoria and the outbreaks that are happening in New South Wales. We don't want to see that happening in Queensland. That's why we're on our guard and we're going to do everything we can to stop that happening here. So look, I'll hand over to the Deputy Premier, then Dr. Young, and then of course our State Disaster Coordinator. Thanks, DP.
So of those 12 remaining active cases, 7 are in hospital. In the last 24-hour testing period, we tested nearly 10,000 Queenslanders, 9,910 Queenslanders, which is a fantastic result. Thank you to all of them, and also to our pathology staff who do continue to work around the clock. 86 tests from the staff at the Bolton Clark Pinjarra Hills nursing home facility have now been returned, and all 86 are negative. We have 7 contacts still to be traced, and attempts have been made to contact all of those. Just further to the comments the Premier made regarding the statement last night from DFAT, I wanted to express my support for the decisions made by the Chief Health Officer. They are on the basis of those national decisions that had been made, and on the basis of evidence presented to her, a letter from DFAT, a diplomatic passport issued by DFAT. Clearly those things will now be investigated, but we can put that matter beyond any doubt by closing the loophole, as the Premier says, removing that exemption. I'm sure that those who serve our country overseas will be very willing to do the right thing. All we're asking is for them to go into 14 days hotel quarantine at their port of arrival, and I'm sure other states will support the Premier at National Cabinet in that call.
So no new cases overnight, which is fantastic news. We've still got another 6 days to go before we can feel that we've safely got through that latest cluster of cases. And we also have some more individuals who've just made it across the border who we're testing and getting those results on. So we all have to remain alert for the next 6 days, but then ongoing after that. It is really, really important that every Queenslander continue if they become sick, to stay at home and immediately get tested, to maintain that very, very important social distancing and wash their hands regularly, and also to not go to places where we know there are a lot of cases. So today that means not going to New South Wales, particularly to Sydney, not going to anywhere in Victoria, and not travelling overseas unless there is absolutely no other option. And people who do go to those places, I know it is a big impost, but you will be asked to go into hotel quarantine when you return, with very, very few exemptions. Thank you.
Good morning. Can I just start with some statistics about what's happened in the last day or so, and also since the 3rd of July. We've had over 1.3 million border declaration passes issued. In the last 24 hours, we've seen 84 flights come into Queensland that we've checked. That's included 3,791 passengers that have been individually checked. 23 have been refused entry, and 173 have been put into quarantine. At our roads, 5,592 vehicles have been intercepted in the last 24 hours. 70 persons refused entry and 23 placed into quarantine. In the last week, we've issued, regrettably, 10 notices to appear for people giving false declarations at our borders and other offences. That includes 3 young men who arrived into Queensland on the 2nd of August, entered into Queensland through via the road at Coolangatta, had a G pass, which is a pass which declared that they had not been in a hotspot when in fact they had been in Melbourne and coming out of Victoria. So they've managed to come from all that way through the Victorian-New South Wales border and then across our border into Queensland. One of those persons has been tested, I understand yesterday, and in that testing process has disclosed that they have been exposed to people from Melbourne. Upon our investigation, we discovered that the 3 of them, who all live in the Logan area, had been into Melbourne. They have now been taken into quarantine and are currently in hotel guarded quarantine here in Brisbane. They have been tested and we await their results for that. All 3 have been issued with notices to appear for false declarations, and there are ongoing investigations in relation to that matter. We've also seen another on-the-spot fine issued at in southern region, which is around our Gundawindi area, for a person doing a false declaration. It's really, really disappointing that given where Victoria is at the moment, and we all know what's happening there, that people in our community are still telling lies and deliberately trying to mislead the system so they can get back into our state. The fact that they have been in Victoria is something of grave concern to all of our community. What we really need people to do is to disclose that. The worst that can happen is they have to go into quarantine for 14 days. They don't get in prison, they don't get fined with anything. But what they're doing by telling lies deliberately is having themselves charged with criminal offences and now having to front court down the track and then answer for their actions in a court of law. That to me seems to be very unacceptable behaviour. What I can say to you is that we'll continue to take that very strong line on people who deliberately deceive the system in trying to get into this state by not declaring that they've been in a hotspot. And it is with great, as I say, it's very regrettable that in the last week we've seen 10 persons issued with such notices, and there is another 4 under investigation at this moment. Thank you.
Can I ask, Victoria and New South Wales border, I understood was a hard border. How do they even get into New South Wales?
Well, I can't answer for what's happened at that border. Lane, obviously we're doing our investigations in collaboration with both our colleagues from Victoria and New South Wales, so we're still unpacking this. This has only happened in the last few days. So the investigation is ongoing. We will definitely look at that. We'll definitely be talking to both sets of authorities around how that might have occurred and trying to work out whether the system needs to be addressed. But I think any system in the world, including our international borders in normal times, that people who criminally deceive their way through, it's a problem for us.
One of them is displaying symptoms and is getting tested and we're waiting for results, is that right? And where did they go in Logan? Have they been out and about?
So Queensland Health are very, very good at their rapid response. That's in play at the moment. So those persons, their backgrounds and that will be done, but we've got to wait for the outcome of the tests, of course. I'll leave that to Jeanette. No, they were intercepted after they've come back into Queensland, in Brisbane. So as a result of the testing, that's what set the alarm.
So you went and got tested?
Yes.
Best of.
Do we know how long they were in, after?
So they came in on Sunday. So this all happened yesterday, that we came to our attention.
Can you elaborate any more on Logan locations that you're looking at, like restaurants and...
No, the first thing, I need the result. So I need to know if they're positive or not. So that's the very first thing. But already we've got people aware in Logan that this is a high risk situation because of the other 3 who went down to Melbourne. So it hasn't changed anything for Logan. People just need to, if they're unwell, to immediately come forward and get tested. So we've already put all the restrictions on the aged care facilities. So there isn't any more we need to do, just that people need to make sure if they're unwell, get tested.
When are you expecting that test back?
Later today.
Dr. Young, is there any kind of roadmap that you might have in mind for when the aged care facilities would reopen in any capacity?
It'll depend what happens over the next week, over the next 6 days, as I said yesterday. We just have to see what other cases we get. If there's any sign of any community transmission, then unfortunately those aged care facilities will have to remain closed to visitors.
So perhaps in 7 days from now you might be able to make a roadmap.
Exactly.
When you spoke about the DFAT letter, who ultimately gave this gentleman the exemption? Was it the New South Wales government? Was it the show?
Well, my understanding is that the gentleman came in to Sydney, had the DFAT letter, but had a exemption from New South Wales. I'm happy to clarify that for you, but my understanding was that it was a New South Wales exemption to leave Sydney to travel to Queensland.
Premier, has it been suggested that this individual is a security contractor who happened to have a diplomatic passport by virtue of his job? I'm very unclear who this individual actually is.
I think those questions are better put to the federal government. But what I can say is that I understand that there was a letter that was provided on DFAT letterhead. That letter, plus the letter from New South Wales, which granted the exemption, has now all gone to the Queensland Police.
Is there a suggestion that that DFAT letter is false?
Well, others are saying that. We need it investigated, and I think I've asked my department to be talking to DFAT to clarify this. But look, I think we are now in a situation where these loopholes have to be closed, and I don't think it's, as the Deputy Premier said too, it's not too much to be asking people who are returning from overseas to do the mandatory quarantine. There's a lot of virus happening overseas. Everyone can see what's happening around the rest of the world, and this is about keeping Australians safe, keeping Queenslanders safe. So if we can fix a loophole, let's have a discussion and see if it can be done. Let's try and keep everyone safe. That's all I'm trying to do here, is to keep people safe.
But that's sort of the question though, is it a loophole or is it a suggestion of fraud?
Well, that's why it's been forwarded to the police. If there is any suggestion that it is not an authentic letter, then that needs to be investigated by the police. I think it should apply to everyone.
Premier, the 3 people you have, is there anything more that you would like to do to doing
Look, we're always happy to look at that, and as the Deputy Commissioner said, the majority of people are doing the right thing. So the majority of people are definitely doing the right thing. It is this small minority that is putting all of Queenslanders' great work at risk, and that's what our concern is. It's a big concern. You've seen the impact that the 3 women had, and now we've got a question mark over the 3 men.
Premier, is there a case for the Prime Minister to extend the Victorian pandemic leave to other states?
I fully support the measures that were put in place, that were announced yesterday for what's happening in Victoria. And if a situation occurred like is happening in Victoria in any other state or territory, I think there would be a very solid case to expand that as well. The last thing we want is people who are sick going to work. And it's a big issue out there in the community. People have got to feed their families, they've got to pay rents, and and a lot of Queenslanders and Australians have a very strong work ethic as well. So there is that, in the past everyone went to work with a flu or a cold, but now you can't. Now the days have completely changed. So can I just urge all Queenslanders again, if you are sick, please stay at home and get tested.
I was going to say, on exemption, you said earlier on before, do you think they should still be granted people on international grounds?
I think that has to be, I'm going to leave that to the Chief Health Officer, but there are sometimes extenuating circumstances. But, I think exemptions need to be closed as much as possible because we've got to keep our communities safe. It is very tough. There's a lot of people at the moment that can't go and see their loved ones overseas, who may have family overseas. It is very, very tough times. So we'll have to go very carefully, and I'll take the advice of our Chief Health Officer on that, and I'm quite sure that that'll be discussed nationally as well.
I mean, the word coming from Canberra is that the security guard slash diplomat was in quarantine in Sydney for a few days. He applied to get into Queensland and was granted an exemption by the Queensland government, which is even shown. He was travelling on his personal taxi.
Well, my understanding is that there was an exemption granted by New South Wales. We're happy to look at all of those matters. But how about we all work together and fix the loopholes and keep Australians safe? I mean, this blame game has been going on for too long in every single situation, whether it's about borders, whether it's about pandemic leave, whether it's about exemptions. How about everyone just work together and stop picking fights and work together in the best interests of our citizens?
Can you shed some light on that? Did you give the exemption, or did the New South Wales? Because the impression yesterday was that it came from you.
Yeah, so New South Wales gave an exemption. They had to, because their nationally agreed protocol is that everyone will quarantine for 14 days at the port of arrival. So New South Wales gave an exemption to that because of that nationally agreed protocol. So he then flew into Queensland, and I gave him an exemption to quarantine at home because of that national agreement. No, before he came into Australia. So all this was done before he left Kabul.
Couldn't you spend 7 days in quarantine in Sydney?
I don't think so, but I'll double check that. But I don't believe so.
So just to be absolutely clear, Dr. Young, the loophole that you talked about, the Premier talked about yesterday and today, this is the loophole around essentially people who hold diplomatic passports having this blanket exemption. This is the loophole that you want closed.
Yes, I also want people to quarantine at their port of arrival. I don't think we should allow people to get onto a domestic flight and fly interstate, because we've got 14 people we are trying to contact who are on that plane. 2 of those people have no contact details. The airline cannot tell me how I can get hold of those 2 people, because there is no requirement for domestic planes to keep contact details. There is a requirement for international, and we know all of those people, we can contact them all, but for domestic, we are struggling today to find 2 of those 14 people. So that's why they should quarantine at the port of arrival.
Should that be a requirement for domestic flights?
Yes, absolutely. Of course it should be. I have pushed for it, yes, and I will continue to push for it. But until that can be absolutely guaranteed as rock solid as for international flights, then I think the only outcome is people must quarantine where they arrive into Australia.
You said you approved the exemption before you flew from Kabul.
Yeah.
Did you see any notice from the New South Wales government that
Yes.
exemption?
Yeah. So I have a letter from the embassy in Kabul. I have information from the individual, and I have information from New South Wales granting the exemption. Yeah. So I have those 3 documents, which now are with police for them to work through.
Given the heightened alert do you think it is still safe to grant people exemptions on compassionate grounds?
I don't give very many. The ones are, people with spinal injuries who are paraplegic and they need a carer. So my first response is, could that carer quarantine with the person in the hotel? And we're working that through so we can get larger rooms. So wherever possible, the default is that people do quarantine in a hotel, but sometimes it just isn't possible. So, but there are very, very, very few.
Dr. Young, whose responsibility would it be to change the rules around details on domestic flights? Is that the AFP? Is that the Commonwealth? Who are you asking to change
Well,
that?
that's really the Commonwealth, because if, planes fly across borders. So it really does need to be the Commonwealth has got to put a requirement in to ask our domestic airlines to please assist.
And what's the response been?
We've been asking for quite a while.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.